Clara and the Nutcracker Doll. It was Christmas Eve, and Clara and Franz were waiting for their godfather, Uncle Johann, to arrive. He came to visit them every year to give them their Christmas presents himself. They were very special presents because Uncle Johann was a toy maker.
"Perhaps he'll come if we shut our eyes and think about him very hard," said Clara.
"Don't be silly," said Franz.
"Oh, let's just try,"
said Clara. So they both shut their eyes tight and thought very hard. Just then, the doorbell rang. "It worked!" cried Clara. And in came Uncle Johann, laughing and shaking the snow off his coat. "Well, well, well," he cried, hugging them both. "Here you are, then. What do you think of these, my little friends?" He gave Franz and Clara a parcel each. Inside Franz's was a beautiful wooden boat with a bright red sail, and inside Clara's was a doll with very long legs, painted to look like a soldier.
"Who is he?"
asked Clara. "He's a Nutcracker doll," said Uncle Johann. "Look." He picked up a nut from a dish on the table, placed it in the doll's mouth, pulled the legs close together, and hey presto, the nut's shell cracked open in two neat halves. Uncle Johann popped the nut into Clara's mouth. Clara was thrilled.
"Oh, he's lovely, Uncle Johann. I've never had a Nutcracker doll before."
And she danced round the room, holding her new doll above her head. Her brother Franz had been watching her all this time, not saying a word. Suddenly, he dashed across the room, snatched the doll, threw it onto the floor, and jumped on it. Clara burst into tears.
"Oh, no! My poor doll!"
Uncle Johann strode across the room, picked up Franz, and bundled him out of the door. Clara could hear him speaking very angrily to Franz as she picked up the Nutcracker doll and looked closely at it. She began to smile through her tears.
"So, you're not broken after all," she whispered.
She curled up on the sofa with the doll in her arms and went to sleep. Later that night, Clara woke to find herself tucked up in her own bed.
"They must have brought me upstairs when I was asleep," she thought. "But where's my Nutcracker doll? He must have fallen on the floor again, poor thing."
Quiet as a mouse, Clara put on her slippers and crept downstairs. The clock struck midnight as she opened the door to the drawing room. Startled, she darted across the floor, leapt onto the sofa, and tucked her feet inside her nightdress. She looked all around her. The fire flared in the grate and lit up the room. Just then, there was the sound of stamping feet, and rows of mice came marching by, led by a mouse king with fierce, bright eyes. Clara's own eyes grew wider and wider as columns of soldiers marched in from the other end of the room. They were Franz's toy soldiers, and leading them was her Nutcracker doll. The mice and the toy soldiers started to fight. In minutes, the Mouse King had driven the Nutcracker doll right up against the sofa where Clara was sitting. "Oh, no, you don't," she thought. In a flash, she had taken off a slipper and thrown it at the Mouse King. Stunned, he fell to the floor. The Nutcracker doll toppled over too and hit his head. The mice rushed forward and carried their king away to safety. Clara started to pick up the Nutcracker doll, but as she did so, quick as a flash, he grew and grew before her very eyes. He was no longer a doll, but a handsome young man. He picked up Clara's slipper, kissed it, and gave it back to her. You saved my life. I shall not forget it, he said, smiling at her.
Who are you? Stammered Clara.
I am the Nutcracker Prince. Will you come with me to my kingdom? It is the kingdom of sweets, and no human being has ever visited it before.
Oh, yes, please. How do we get there?
Scarcely had she spoken when a boat appeared. Clara and the prince stepped into it and skimmed off through the wintry night. Snowflakes whirled and danced around them, but Clara felt as warm as if she were wrapped in eiderdown. At last, they arrived at the Nutcracker Prince's palace. Clara gazed at it entranced. It was made from white icing, with towers of pink icing, columns of barley sugar, and chandeliers of glistening pear drops. A beautiful, dainty lady welcomed Clara as though she were a princess.
I am the Sugar Plum Fairy, she said, and I have all kinds of treats to show you.
Come with me, said the prince, and he led Clara into the ballroom to a peppermint throne studded with silver balls. Sit here, he said kindly.
But what is going to happen?
All your favorite sweets will dance for you, said the prince. He smiled and put his finger to his lips as music filled the ballroom. Clara's heart beat with excitement as two dancers leapt into the middle of the ballroom. They were dressed in rich brown velvet, and Clara watched enthralled as they weaved and stamped to and fro.
They must be chocolates, my favorite, she whispered to the prince.
And as if by magic, the dancers became chocolates. Next came a dozen children, skipping and tripping in candy-coloured dresses.
Fruit drops, said Clara, clapping and laughing. How I love them!
Then two very tall, thin men, dressed in black from head to foot, wobbled to and fro in front of her in a most comical way.
Oh, there's no mistaking them. They're Franz's favourite, licorice.
In another minute, the prince had taken Clara's hand and led her onto the dance floor. They whirled around together so fast that the pear-drop chandeliers, the peppermint throne, and the walls of white icing all mixed into one bright blur of light. Now for the loveliest surprise of all, said the prince, as he led Clara back to the peppermint throne. There was a dainty tinkling of music as the Sugar Plum Fairy stepped into the center of the ballroom. She danced tirelessly, like a snow crystal floating on the wind, and Clara could not take her eyes off her for a second.
Can she be real?
She wondered, and as she did so, she looked down and saw that she was holding her Nutcracker doll in her arms. She blinked, sat up, and looked around. She was once more in her own bed, and the prince, the ballroom, and the Sugar Plum Fairy had all melted away.
How very strange,
thought Clara, and she snuggled down under the covers again, the Nutcracker doll under her arm.
I wonder if I will ever see the kingdom of sweets again.
And she fell fast asleep.